This is a great conversation so far, and I want to pick up pretty much where we left off, which is, really on one of the most on a controversial subject, one of the most controversial when it comes to the UAP topic, but one we really have to kind of face and discuss. Even if people don't think it's real or represents something that is in reality as we know it, which is abductions. Now, we don't always presume with the Soul Foundation that we're addressing an audience of UAP enthusiasts. So what is that, and why do you think there's something to it?
Well, abductions, is sort of is the bad boy, you know what I mean, of UAP phenomena, because it's really very, very difficult to believe in some respects, unless you've experienced it yourself, like I have. But when you do read the accounts, seriously, hundreds of thousands of accounts. Roper did a poll, I think, in '91, and it was, I think they made the case that 500,000 people, have claimed to have had abduction experiences. I mean, if you winnow out, the people that have schizotypal disorders or maybe, some type of bipolar event where something like that happened, or a lucid dream, or, they were in a liminal state and they, experienced something, you can winnow some of those out, but you can't really dismiss all of it. John Mack did two big studies, one big study, but he wrote two wonderful books on the topic. And so did Thomas Bullard, who I think it's just really a classic work, because he's really looked at this from a scientific standpoint, at least from a field perspective, and is able to come up with, so he did an adumbration of the aspects of the abduction experience. So what you have is something that people are experiencing, a lot of people have been experiencing, started around he saw elements of it in the 50s and 60s, and then it increased in the 70s. And it sort of ended in the 90s, late 90s to a certain extent. It still happens, but not very much nowadays from what I understand. But it's one of those, everybody likes the nuts and bolts, because everybody, they watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T., and they've seen, The Arrival, Interstellar, wonderful films that tend to touch on, just sort of the nuts and bolts aspects of technology. We have ships that can do this now, and space stuff and what have you, but they don't really discuss the other end of it. I mean, do our minds evolve with our bodies? Will our consciousness evolve at the same time? I think that's the case, and I think we might be seeing a little bit of that right now. I have no proof of that or anything like that. Consciousness is vexing, because is it local? Is it non-local? I don't know. I tend to believe it's non-local for a variety of reasons, but abduction follows, a classic abduction follows a pattern. I think that Bullard sort of, about 8 steps. One of them being, which I love the word, theophany, where they have this spiritual transformation after the experience, after the horror of the experience, and the trauma of the experience. It sort of, evolves into this whole different disruptive pattern, and it sort of resembles an initiation ceremony, maybe from the Roman mystery schools or the Eleusinian schools that the Greeks had, and it mirrors some mystical religious experiences also. So I mean, you look at this, and we're familiar with the concept, in a sense, but the fact that these are quote unquote abductions from, I mean, we're not seeing angels. You're seeing sometimes gray beings, or tall whites, or choose your flavor of extraterrestrial beings that people sometimes witness.
But the reason I brought this up is that even though some of this resembles very closely, as you pointed out, certain kinds of religious experience and certain kinds of visionary experiences, there's still something tangible enough about it, disturbingly tangible, that people who've been touched by it, such as yourself, feel that something very, very real is happening. and they have the perception that it's indelibly connected to UAP in some way. And so, it would seem that the secrecy could have something to do with that. That would be a reasonable inference. But what do you think about that?
Well, that's a really good point. Let's use me as an example. I don't talk about this very often, and the first time I brought it up in depth or any kind of detail was, believe it or not, with George Knapp on a Netflix series that he had done, and for some reason or other, the Netflix completely cut the whole interview out, and which was fine by me. I don't really care, but it was the first time I ever explained what had happened. But yeah, I mean, when you have this experience, and for me, my wife's a clinical psychologist. I'm an intelligence guy. We tend to be happy-go-lucky people. We don't have any children, but yet one night, something very, very strange happened. I was laying in, my bed, and then the next thing sort of through the wall, these three beings come through, and they weren't great looking at all. They were completely distinct. As a matter of fact, a friend of ours who but I don't want to name him because I don't know if he would want to be named, described them to me. He told me exactly who they were. I mean, they've seen these things not very often. I was like the third instance these things appeared. But anyway, the upshot of this was, it was an experience that was a hell of a lot more than a vivid dreaming or a lucid dreaming. I know what those are. I know what nightmare states are, and I know what liminal states are. This was totally different. It was as real as me chatting here with you, if that's real. And I remember waking up from this. I won't get into the episodes happened, but the problem with it was when I got up, I was absolutely stunned because it was like, what, it was like, one minute I was in bed seeing these things, they were smiling at me, say these little tiny smiles, and I couldn't move. But I remember seeing my wife all curled up in a fetal position. And then, then when I woke up, she was very ill. Unexplained bleeding to the point where we had to get her to a doctor, and this lasted for 17 days. And then I had a puncture hole in the back of my neck, and bleeding, and perfectly round, like the eraser of a pencil, that big at the base of my neck. So I didn't pay much attention, and my wife looked at it and she said, looks like, looks unusual. I don't know what to make of it, but we were more interested in getting her to a doctor. So the point being, and I'll make this short, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I had an X-ray done on my face because I had some TMJ work and stuff done, and when Gary Nolan and Kit Green saw the X-ray, they pinpointed the fact that somebody had given me a puncture biopsy. And I remember Kit calling me up and saying, "When the hell did you get a puncture biopsy?" And I said, "I've never had a puncture biopsy." Now, it shows it on the X-ray. I have the X-ray, And then not too long after that, my wife, it was rather gross, but she coughed out through her nose a piece of metal, which I have over here, that, Hal Putoff and Eric Davis were kind enough to look at. Totally inconclusive, but it was a tiny, tiny square piece of metal. There was no commercial use for it that I knew of. They thought maybe it might have come from a toothbrush, but what the hell was it doing in her sinus cavity? But anyway, my wife got better. I healed. I got another X-ray, and that had healed. Whatever it was, it had healed up. But what it left me with in the beginning was sort of like a meh response. My friend Robert Hastings likes to talk, UFOs and nukes. Seminal book. I love the book, but he calls it the meh response. Like, things like this happen to you, and then you sort of look at it and you go, "What am I going to do with that? Where do I go to? Where are all my books? Where did I look that up?" And none of it's there, right? So you just say, "What are you going to do?" I go on with my life. But it wasn't until later on that I realized that to me, it was a human rights violation.
Mm.
They damaged my wife. They damaged me. I didn't care about me so much, but that just really royally pissed me off that something happened to her. Now and then, but then again, is that completely indicative that something, quote unquote, noetic happened? No, it's not. It could have been just circumstantial, things. But when you associate it with what I experienced, this sequence of events which I experienced, it fits like this. It doesn't, the chances of them being totally separate to me are just infinitesimally small.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll jump in and say, as an anthropologist and a scholar who looks at this stuff,
right.
that in fact, what is so bizarre, whatever explanation you'd want to give to it about these sorts of experiences, they're difficult. It's difficult to say that they're purely virtual or noetic events, and at the same time, they don't quite fit into reality as we know it. There are lots of physical things take place, and yet, if you were to try to do a forensic investigation, you'd probably fail. There are
Yeah,
a bunch of things
absolutely.
aren't there that should be there. And that's my way of saying to people who aren't familiar with this that we're not dealing with psychosis with this. This is that was John Mack's quick conclusion when he saw patients. You can see from Jim's reaction that this something very real happened to him, and he's disturbed by it still to this day, especially the impact on his wife. And then we go out to the fact that we have a lot of narratives about this. Thomas Bullard, a folklorist who Jim mentioned, did a really brilliant investigation of this in the 90s. And he said, you know what? The problem with assuming that these are just cultural narratives is they should change as they're transmitted from time to place. That's what happens with folk tales. They don't do that. He said it's an extremely static account that witnesses give, and it has 8 or 9 parts, and they're always there. And that's very, very unusual. So, both from your point of view and mine, you're dealing with something that, in simple terms, we'd call real.